At Carafem, you can choose the abortion care that works best for you. With in-person visits in Atlanta, Chicago, and the D.C. area, or medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. Some people feel more comfortable meeting with a provider in person and leaving either no longer pregnant or with pills in hand. Others prefer getting abortion pills by mail. Just fill out a short online form and, if eligible, your medication arrives in a few days in a plain package. When you choose abortion pills, Cara, our text-based abortion companion, is with you every step of the way, offering 24/7 support and answers whenever you need them. However you get care, Carafem will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carafem.org.
In Walmart's Who Newville, joy started to grow. For online-only savings sure to steal the show. Tech treats and toys so dazzling and new. Walmart Cyber Monday deal soon ready for you. It's online only with very little time to spare. December 1st will soon be here, so be sure to be there. The Who's are prepared. Are you ready too? A day packed with savings. Amazing! Who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
Get your mother-loving ears on because your big-time radio DJ's got news. PayPal lets you choose how you want to pay for all the stuff. With PayPal, I can pay in-store, pay online, or pay over time. What's that? You want this translated into song? I hope you're sitting down. You can pay your own way. You keep those ears on, you hear? Don't just pay, baby. PayPal.
Learn more at paypal.com.
The problems for Henry start when he rules himself. That's when the wheels start to fall off. And it's not because Henry's an idiot. It's because Henry is a peace-loving, pious individual, and he's naive, certainly, there's no question about that. But essentially, he's unable to be what a monarch needed to be in the middle of the 15th century, or indeed in any medieval century.
Hello. On the 31st of August 1422, Henry V, England's finest king, died aged 35. His successor, Henry VI, was only 9 months old, and so his uncle and Henry V's brother John, Duke of Talbot, became regent and continued the war in France. The young Henry was a gentle child, and most worrying for England, he lacked a monarch as mentor, and so had little understanding of how to handle the politics of kingship in the 15th century. The consequences would be severe, as the Wars of the Roses would erupt in 1455 for a number of reasons, chief among them Henry VI. Joining to discuss the causes of the conflict is historian and author Derek Birks, whose new book, A Guide to the Wars of the Roses, is now out, and David Pilling, also historian and author, and his latest novel is Kingbreaker, set during the Wars of the Roses. So, we look into why this war broke out, a clash so catastrophic that it chewed up 4 kings, as well as countless nobles and peasants. In part 1, we discuss Henry VI. Part 2, out on Wednesday, examines the factions involved. Please do subscribe or follow, and if you can let people know about the pod, I'd be grateful. But in the meantime, it's Derek Birks and David Pilling, and me, discussing the causes of the Wars of the Roses, Part 1, Henry VI. Derek, David, welcome to the podcast. It's a great pleasure to have you both on.
Hello.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Splendid. Now, so today's discussion is to talk about the causes of the Wars of the Roses. And so, listeners, I've got Derek and David on. Derek's just written, very recently had a book published called A Guide to the Wars of the Roses. So, and David is a writer of medieval history books and historical fiction. So we're in very safe hands here. And me in particular, because whilst I'm fascinated by the period, and actually I should hold my hands up. The reason why I'm so interested is because I played a game in my youth called Kingmaker.
Oh, I
which
know it. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
most
yeah.
brilliant board game. So if listeners, I think you can get it on eBay relatively inexpensively, but you have to write off an entire day. You can't play it in 2 hours. So Derek, I wanted to start with you really, because the Wars of the Roses, that it's quite a complex set of engagements over a long period of time. And really, we've got two houses of Lancaster and York, but do we have to go a little bit further back to understand what a kind of root cause, or is it's like anything, it's complicated and there's more than one reason for the outbreak of hostilities, which I think is in 1455?
Well, yeah, it's difficult to say anything about the Wars of the Roses, really, which can't be contradicted. Uh,
Good stuff.
the first thing to say is that it isn't really about the rivalry or ongoing rivalry between the houses of York and Lancaster. That's not really what it is. It's in our psyche that that's what it's about. And that's because of a chronicler called Edward Hall in the 16th century, Tudor chronicler, who explained what had happened to those who could read in the 16th century by saying, well, you know, this terrific guy Henry Tudor came along and solved this great divide in the nation. Now, Hall, that's not propaganda. People say, oh, it's Tudor propaganda. It's not propaganda. He was just saying what most thinking Tudor people thought. That's how they perceived it. But anyone who actually lived through it would find that a completely unrecognizable description of it, because that's not what it was. It wasn't a civil war in that sense. Essentially, it's three separate but slightly connected crises. So the phrase of the Wars of the Roses obviously coined a long time ago, nothing to do with roses, obviously, but the problem with the topic is that it's in our psyche that certain things are true. And the book I've just written is trying to rid us of of many of those myths. Let's put it that way.
Okay, great. And so, David, I just wanted to check with you because I know you've said to me before we started recording that you've got an expertise sort of leading up to this century. So you recognize a lot of the families here, don't you?
Mm.
Because these are aristocratic dynasties that have been in power across various parts of England for many years. And what I wanted to know is basically dynastic rivalries, basically what's been happening throughout the medieval period since 1066, and the Wars of the Roses is just another one of them?
To an extent, I think. I mean, one of the things that strikes me when I look at what happens in the mid 15th century, coming from where I usually, the era I'm more comfortable with, which is the sort of 13th century up to sort of mid 14th century, is that the French War is one of the big problems, and the fact that England is losing it very badly under Henry VI. And this goes all the way back, depending how you want to look at it, but I think to 200 years earlier, when the then King of England, Henry III, he bound himself and his heirs in perpetuity as a vassal of the French king for Aquitaine, which is all that was left, the last sort of bit, really, of what used to be called the Angevin Empire. And Aquitaine is the last bit to be lost by Henry VI. It's a sort of the same theme crossing 200 years. And the government of England under Henry had lots and lots of problems, but Derek mentioned three causes of the war. I'm assuming, though I may be wrong, that what happens in France and the final loss of Bordeaux in 1453, I think, the capital of Aquitaine, is one of the big problems, which it wanders away from your question about dynastic rivalry. But I was also going to say that the war, what we call the 100 Years' War itself, although it became a national conflict between England and France, it itself starts as a dynastic contest between two francophone royal houses, Plantagenet and Capet, their cousins. And it starts out as this fight over sovereignty and then gets turned into a national conflict in I think, a very calculated way, because the kings of England from about Edward III onwards realise the only way they can mobilise the English populace to take part in this war is if they turn it into a national conflict, and they start adopting all of this nationalist, like the flag of St. George and all of this language and symbolism. So by the time you get to the 15th century, it's perceived as, England versus France, Ross beef versus frogs. which has stayed with us ever since. But short answer is yes, it's all, I think, dynastic, aristocratic gang warfare on a local or national scale.
Good stuff. But then, okay, so France, yes, it's under Henry VI, who's the mentally deficient, but also a baby, a child when he becomes king. His father, Henry V. Listeners will may be familiar with the most recent episode on this period is with covering Henry V's reign. So, yes, Henry VI is a baby, a child, in 1422 when he becomes
Correct.
king. Yeah. So, and then the 100 Years' War has, so we had thought, been won by Henry V. And then under Henry VI, it's this, as you've just mentioned, David, this is loss of lands, and it's very distressing to read about when I look in the history books. And Joan of Arc, the heretic who takes these English lands. But Derek, is that really a kind of tipping point? You know, we have aristocrats and people who maybe aren't overly enthusiastic about spending a lot of money and time in France, but at least you can get by it with victory. But when there's no victories and you're losing land, then your monarch becomes very unpopular. Added to that, the monarch's a child. I mean, so these are two major problems.
Yeah, I think we need to separate a few strands out about Henry VI. First of all, let me say he's not mentally deficient. There's no evidence whatsoever that he's mentally deficient. It's again one of those things that's in the psyche, that Henry VI was mad or he was a simpleton. Absolutely no evidence of that at all. But as you say, he was 9 months old or something when he succeeded to the throne. So he has the longest minority in English history. And it's not till he's about 15, 16 when he starts to have some influence. But it's a long time before the nobles who are ruling England for him release their hold, if you like, on him. And let me say, until that point, England is actually governed pretty well. The minority is not, you'd think, well, if somebody wants to get rid of the Lancastrians, the best time to do it is when the heir is 9 months old or at some point when he's a child. Doesn't happen. Nobody's challenging Henry VI.
He has two. Sorry to interrupt you. But he has two uncles, doesn't he? Not Derek. Sorry, Humphrey and John, who are the younger brothers of Henry
Bedford.
V. Sorry,
Bedford and
Bedford. Yeah. John, Duke of Bedford. Yeah,
and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. Yeah, and that. To be fair, there are issues, but they did a pretty good job, really, and so did the other people ruling for him. The problems for Henry start when he rules himself. That's when the wheels start to fall off. And it's not because Henry's an idiot. It's because Henry is a peace-loving, pious individual, and he's naive, certainly, there's no question about that. But essentially, he's unable to be what a monarch needed to be in the middle of the 15th century, or indeed in any medieval century, because he can't make firm decisions and he can't stick to them anyway. So if you're dealing with, we've talked about, strong aristocracy, nobles who are very important, very powerful. If you're dealing with those sort of guys, you need to be able to control them. And Henry had no example to follow. He didn't watch his father as he grew up ruling and dispensing justice and all the rest of it. He didn't have that. So he had no blueprint to work from. It's not that he didn't understand what was happening. It's just that he wasn't very good at doing it. He ruled from duty, from a sense of trying to do the right thing. And inevitably, when people try and do the right thing, it doesn't always work out.
From what Derek's saying there, David, he sounds a little bit like, and you can correct me here, but it sounds not a million miles from Edward II, like a young Edward II.
Well,
no,
I don't know. No, I think Edward II had problems all of his own. You could probably maybe draw a vague comparison in that they both suffered from favoritism. And I mean, Derek will know more about this, but I think Henry could be accused of indulging people like Suffolk and Somerset when he might have benefited from getting rid of them. But certainly with Edward II, not an idiot again, actually quite an intelligent guy in some ways, but he's just one of these individuals who was just born into entirely the wrong job. He had no capacity for what he was supposed to do. And again, there's a similarity in that they're both the sons of very formidable fathers and will inevitably suffer from comparison, who both left very difficult legacies. Edward had the Scottish War to cope with, and then Henry is left with France. But then, as Derek said, the minority, especially while Bedford is alive, is not a failure by any means. I mean, Bedford wins a victory at Verneuil, which is every bit as impressive as Agincourt, but it doesn't fit into the Shakespearean sort of Henry V myth. So, and then I think there's another one at a place called Crevant in about 1428, where another Franco-Scots army was wiped out. So for about, when did Bedford die? 1435. So up until Henry's sort of adolescence, he has got these strong figures around him. I mean, you could argue that Bedford was, if you're looking for a role model, is every bit as impressive as his father. Yeah. What he lacks, of course, is he wasn't a king. Regent, I think. But yeah, I say there are some similarities between Edward II and Henry VI, but both very different personalities, really.
Why, if you've got Bedford, John Duke of Bedford and Humphrey Duke of Gloucester, both formidable fighters, aren't they? Why does France end so terribly? Is it all because of the heretic Joan of Arc?
No, it isn't. It's to do with the war has been going on for a very long time, and Henry believes that peace is the best policy.
Yeah.
Now, Suffolk, who was sort of running the government up until 1450, he also saw that the opportunity for peace would probably be a good idea, but only if England was in a strong position so they could negotiate a peace on their terms. Henry, however, didn't really have that problem. And he believed that the French king and he, both being Christian monarchs, could come to an agreement and just put an end to the war. And to do that, he wrote a secret letter to the King of France saying, well, you can have the two provinces of Maine and Anjou in return for a commitment to peace. Now, this is what tells you that Henry's not an idiot, because he keeps it secret, because he knows that is dynamite as far as his lords are concerned. They don't want to hear anything about giving away vast tracts of what they have in France. So Henry is the architect of his own downfall in terms of the French war, because the English war effort is in a complete mess from that point onwards, because the King of France says to himself, right, okay, we've got these guys on the run. We just need to press and press and press. And in the end, they'll implode. And in 1453, that's what happens.
Something I've always wondered, if Henry had gone, regardless of what he was like as a personality, if he had gone to France in person at some point over this decade, I think you're talking about the Treaty of Tours, so about 1444-ish.
Yes.
If he bolted on his armor and sort of made an effort to lead his army himself, even if he wasn't a naturally warlike person, would his mere presence on the continent have done some good?
I think the problem with Henry, wherever he was, is that his presence was not very great. And therefore, I'm not sure that it would have been a positive. I mean, there would have been a symbolism to it, obviously. Yeah. Definitely. And they did negotiate about having a meeting between the two kings. That was certainly on the agenda for some time, but it never somehow came about. And I don't know enough about those negotiations to know whether that was the fault of the English or the French or both. But it never seemed to be a real possibility. It was talked about a lot because he felt that all he needed to do was get together with his brother king and they'd just iron out the differences. But that was his kind of naive take on it, really.
He sounds a bit like Henry III in that regard, this kind of naivety. All we have to do, we're all good Christians, let's just sit down. I am, nobody else is. But
Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben Macintyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99. That's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions. Now back to the show. So is this really the main problem here? Is that so? Let's deal with Henry VI then. So if he had gone to France, he would have spent all his time sort of praying in church and not really going out and acting like someone who believes he's the King of France.
To be honest with you, in terms of the Wars of the Roses, I don't think it would have made any difference, because though the loss of France was a body blow, I mean, we can't predict what would have happened if it didn't turn out that way, but I don't think it's not that by any means the whole story. In fact, it's not really. It's still a bit of a sideshow in terms of the causes of the Wars of the Roses. It's a factor. It's there. It has a detrimental effect when the war ends badly, or when the war takes a bad turn. But it's not. It doesn't cause anything to happen in terms of the Wars of the Roses, what we call the Wars of the Roses.
Okay, well, we'll get to why you think that is then. But Henry himself, he's accused of being, I said he was mentally deficient. You corrected me. Where do we get this story of him being, I don't know, is it sort of a mental illness accusation?
Yeah, this is where I think things get a bit muddy, basically. He's not a simpleton in the sense of somebody who has no sense at all, doesn't know what he's doing kind of thing. But at the time, they actually had to defend in the law courts against accusations that he was a simpleton. So it's not as if at the time these things weren't leveled in his direction. But I think the motivation for those was not that people genuinely thought he was an idiot, but that he was doing things which they didn't expect the King of England to do, particularly in relation to France. And so I think there's that side of it. The other thing, completely separate thing really, is the fact that he goes into a catatonic trance or a catatonic state in 1453. And that is, to be honest with you, the most important thing about Henry VI. Because in 1453, a number of things happen. It's one of the August is one of those months of the century that you want to forget, really. First of all, the great English hero Talbot, who is leading the war effort in France, is killed, and a major battle is lost. You know, it's a black day in terms of the war with France, and that's news reaches the English court in 1453 in the summer that's happened. At the same time, better news. Margaret of Anjou, Henry's wife, is pregnant and is expecting a child, which has been long awaited and is also obviously a clearly important point. Now, we're not sure which of those two events sends Henry VI over the edge, really, whether it's the surprise of his wife finally getting pregnant or the news of the defeat in France, or a combination of the two. But shortly after that, he basically goes into a catatonic state and is in no communication at all with the rest of the world.
That's so weird.
Very weird.
But yeah. Surely it's he's happy about the child, his wife being pregnant, so it's got to be the defeat.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I was being a little bit facetious.
Oh, you were
that,
right.
But I mean, but at the time, and in the years afterwards, the Yorkist propaganda machine said that it couldn't possibly be his child.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's nonsense, but it's another story. But basically, the really important thing that happens to Henry VI is that he goes into this state where he can't rule. It's a personal monarchy. If you haven't got a monarch, you haven't got government. It's as simple as that. So, I mean, people often say, well, why didn't so-and-so do this? Why didn't so-and-so do that? This was unprecedented, really. There have been occasions when a king might be ill, but normally he could communicate in some way. He could express his views. He could say yes or no. He could even just nod or shake his head. Henry VI could not communicate, and his councillors tried endlessly for months, literally months. And in the meantime, government was on autopilot. Anything that happened, it just carried on, basically. And that could have gone on for a lot longer, except that one of the key officers of state died, the Chancellor, and only the King could oversee the appointment of a new Chancellor. And so the council had to make a decision. What the heck do we do? Somebody's got to appoint a Chancellor, but none of us have got the authority to do that. And that's where they have to decide, well, okay, somebody else is going to have to be a protector. And crikey, who is that going to be? And so that's the moment where Henry is not in control because he's mentally not there, and the council have to try and sort out what is an unholy mess. But let's not forget that there is an heir to the throne in waiting, as it were. So we're not talking about no king, no successor. It's all there in place. So what the council are looking at now is, okay, because they don't know how long this is going to carry on. Maybe it'll carry on for the rest of Henry's life. So what do? Well, we need somebody who can be a protector of the realm now, who can rule in place of the king, and can also act as regent for his child. That's what they wrestle with. And that's where things start to get very badly wrong.
It's okay to want an abortion. Did you know 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant will have one? So it's actually more common than most people think. At CareFM, you can choose what type of abortion care works best for you. We have in-person locations with private entrances in Atlanta, Chicago, and the Washington, D.C. areas. And we also offer medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. For some people, it's more comforting to come into a private office where they can sit with one of our medical providers and either leave no longer pregnant or with abortion pills in hand. For others, they prefer to get abortion pills through the mail so they can decide the best time and place to complete the process. Getting abortion pills by mail from CareFM is simple. Fill out an online form, and a licensed provider will review your medical history. And if eligible, your medication will be shipped to you in a couple of days. Kara, our text-based abortion companion, will guide you through the process from start to finish with instructions, reminders, and answers to all your questions whenever they come up 24/7. With either choice, please know CareFM will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carefm.org.
But this is really interesting to me. So, David, monarchy at this stage, it almost seems like from reading about Richard II, Henry IV, Henry V, and now with Henry VI, there's almost like an expectation amongst the elite that the monarch needs to really be on the ball. In a way that I feel, and I'm using sort of slightly more modern language, so forgive me, but in a way that I get the sense that the monarch in the sort of 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, there seems to be a little bit more leeway. For example, Stephen of Blois, who becomes King Stephen, his claim to the throne's a little bit dodgy, not as close as Henry IV's was, yet he can become king. What I'm trying to get at is that, is there something about the monarchy in this period that's different to the kings we had before that, where there was more of there's more of an expectation now of a level of competence that there wasn't a little bit more leeway before?
I'm not sure. I mean, you mentioned Stephen. The thing about Stephen was that although he was accused of being sort of meek and soft and not doing any justice, he wasn't a very effective war leader. He was he could lead his armies effectively, which is something poor old Henry VI couldn't do. So in that respect, I think the expectation was the same. You had to, except medieval kingship, I've always thought is this sort of impossible job where you had to be a combination of, warlord, justice, administrator, somebody who can get along with all of these warring factions and keep them in line. And I think the expectation is generally the same all the way through. You've got to be good at one of those things, preferably 2 or 3. I mean, Henry IV, he's a usurper, but he manages just about to sort of cling on to power because he's an effective warrior, sort of ex-crusader, very tough individual. You look at Henry VI, it's very difficult to see, well, what is this man's, to use modern language, what is his skill set? To do him justice, Derek will know better than me, but I can think of 2 occasions on which he seems to have been somewhat effective. One, I think some French diplomats record a meeting where Henry was surprisingly active. He sort of bounced into the council chamber and he doffed his cap and he was quite eloquent. But the fact that that impressed them is like, wow, he's being reasonably compos mentis today. This is amazing. But then there was another occasion, I think it's at Ludford Bridge, 1459, where the Yorkists are actually forced to disperse and flee because Henry actually puts on his armour and he leads his army in person. And their whole argument is that they're not attacking the king in person, they're going after his evil advisors. So when Henry is actually fit and capable enough to put himself at the head of an army, that calls their bluff. It's like, well, are we going to fight him? Well, no, we can't, because that ruins our whole argument. And York and Warwick and all the rest of them have to run away to Ireland and Calais. So on the sort of very few occasions where Henry appears to be effective and he does all the conventional things that are expected and have always been expected of a good king, I think it shows that the same qualities are expected throughout the entire period. He just hasn't got it, or not consistently anyway.
I'll tell you something remarkable about Henry VI, following exactly from what David's just said, is that despite all his very numerous shortcomings, and despite his failure to rule effectively as a king, the loyalty that he had throughout this whole period is amazing. Absolutely amazing. And it shows you the mystique of monarchy.
All those men these nobles who were still fighting for him at places like Hexham in the mid-1460s, or giving him shelter in these castles. And the cause is completely lost by this stage. The Lancastrians have been thrashed out of sight, but they're still holding out for Henry. Yeah. And the man has to be tied to his horse by this stage, So it is, Derek said, it's incredible mystique of kingship.
But, okay, mystique of kingship, but that didn't stop other kings being knifed or accidentally falling downstairs.
No, well, it's not a rule, it's a guideline.
but what I'm getting at is there's something more about Henry. Is like he's inspired loyalty. Is that because he's like, it sounds like he's a lovely guy, really nice, likes going to church, doesn't like fighting. But because he's such a nice man, he does sort of have this kind of devotion? Or is there no personal side to it? It's simply that it is, as Derek just said, the mystique of the king.
I think there is a personal side to it. I think he is quite a pleasant chap, but he's not one of the lads. He's not going to have a conversation with you about your war lance or your war horse or the sort of things that maybe the chaps will talk about. But I think he's a very pleasant individual who cares about things. He cares about the people around him. But and that does come across, and it comes across with some of the more moderate councillors who aren't affiliated in the early days to either York or Edmund of Somerset. People like the Duke of Buckingham in the early years, who's a moderate man who's trying to broker deals right, left, and centre to keep the peace. He seems to respect the king. He seems to be respected by the king. So I think there is some relationship there between Henry VI and some of his nobles.
We probably shouldn't forget the piety. It might look vaguely ridiculous to us, but I think that was important at the time. The fact Henry was, so pious and had this slightly, as Derek said, he doesn't mix with the lads. He's this very kind of almost saintly. I think he was venerated as a saint eventually after his death. So that inspires respect, if nothing else. He's and perhaps inspired a certain protectiveness in some of the men around him.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget part 2 is out on Wednesday when we look at the factions involved, so do subscribe or follow. Please do let pod lovers know about aspects of history, but until then, thank you and good night.